This is BBC One. Now a news report from John Humphreys.
Britain has suffered its first major losses in the Falklands conflict. The Ministry of Defence announced tonight that the destroyer Sheffield came under an Argentine missile attack. It later sank. All the crew who got out of the ship have been picked up, but the ministry spokesman says there were casualties. He didn't say how many. HMS Sheffield, one of the most modern warships in the Royal Navy, normally has a crew of nearly 300 men. As well as her loss, a Sea Harrier was shot down and its pilot killed. Here's how the Defence Ministry spokesman made the announcement about the Sheffield.
In the course of its duties within the total exclusion zone around the Falkland Islands, HMS Sheffield, a Type 42 destroyer, was attacked and hit late this afternoon by an Argentine missile. The ship caught fire, which spread out of control. When there was no longer any hope of saving the ship's company abandoned ship. All who abandoned her were picked up. It is feared that there have been a number of casualties, but we have no details of them yet. Next of kin will be informed first as soon as details are received.
HMS Sheffield, here off Gibraltar, was launched 11 years ago by the Queen and cost over £23 million. She went into service 7 years ago and was reckoned to be one of the most modern warships in the Royal Navy, with her powerful engines and Sea Dart missiles. It's thought the missile which sank her was of French design. For the latest political developments now, over to Westminster and Rodney Foster.
The Prime Minister, who was informed of the loss of HMS Sheffield at about 6 o'clock this evening, is said to be deeply concerned at this tragedy. Labour's leader, Michael Foot, has described what happened as grave and tragic. He was prepared to wait for a full government statement tomorrow, but some Labour MPs weren't, and a few moments ago several demanded an immediate government statement on what one has described as this massive folly taking place. The Leader of the Commons, John Biffin, eventually said he would pass their views on to the Defence Secretary, John Nott. I understand there could well be a holding statement within the next few minutes. But it's being stressed that despite the loss of the Sheffield, the government's resolve is unimpaired. The Falklands remain occupied, ministers stress, and the task force continues with its duties as planned. The government's taking up the position that up to now it's had quite a remarkable run of success which could not last. But the demands are now growing among Labour MPs for the government to cease hostilities.
And the Ministry of Defence tonight issued the following telephone numbers for relatives to call in for news of casualties. They are in London, 218-3253 or 4, and that's 01 if you're calling from outside London. Rosyth, 0383 412 191. Faslane, 0436 71125. Plymouth, 0752 666666. Portland, 0305 821 547. Portsmouth, 0705 827 671. Chatham, 0634 812 771. Those numbers are for relatives only, and I'll just go through them again. Rosyth, 412 191. Faslane, 71125. Plymouth, 666666. Portland, 821 547. Portsmouth, 827 671. Chatham, 812 771. And those numbers are for relatives only. Newsnight is on the air now with more news on the conflict, and we'll be back with another report on BBC One at about 11:30.
Now, before our next programme, we go back to the newsroom and Jan Leeming.
Within the past hour, the Ministry of Defence announced important progress in the battle to recapture the Falklands. British paratroops have retaken Darwin and Goose Green. Initial reports are that British casualties are light. In Argentine air attacks on the San Carlos beachhead earlier, 4 Marines and a Royal Engineer were reported killed and 20 more wounded. This is how the Ministry spokesman reported tonight's British success.
We have just learned that the 2nd Battalion of the Parachute Regiment has taken Darwin and Goose Green. The Argentine forces suffered casualties and a number of prisoners have been taken. Initial reports are that British casualties are light and the next of kin are being informed. No additional information is yet available either in Whitehall or in the service information centres. Please do not ring them. As soon as we have any information, a further announcement will be made.
The announcement of the seizure of Darwin and Goose Green has ended a news blackout which lasted 48 hours. The Darwin garrison was about 500 strong. The Argentine troops were dug in strong defensive positions to the north of the settlement and across the narrow isthmus in Goose Green. The importance of this action was twofold. First, apart from defeating a large number of Argentine troops and taking prisoners, it gives the RAF an airfield which can be adapted for use by Harrier ground attack aircraft. They can now be flown into the Falklands from the carrier force. Secondly, and more important, it opens up the vital southern route to Port Stanley. What this means is that the paratroops can now advance along this route to threaten the Port Stanley lines, while the commanders in the north can use helicopters to hedge-hop across no man's land to the northern flank of the main Argentine force. The Argentine commander, General Menendez, was probably hoping the Darwin force would be able to hold out much longer. That would have given him more time to stiffen his main defensive line. But Darwin, which is the Falklands' second main residential centre, is now in British hands, and the main body of the British force can now concentrate on the drive east. And at any time now, the 3,500 troops in the reserve force on the QE2 will be landed. This battle was the key to the British strategy to retake the Falklands. Its success means that the risks taken by Admiral Sandy Woodward, and in particular the Navy's prolonged fight to protect the beachhead, a fight which cost 3 British warships, have paid off.
The Argentine government haven't yet admitted the loss of Darwin and Goose Green. A short while ago, a spokesman said there had been a British attack, but he claimed it had been beaten back.
According to the Argentine government, far from having taken Port Darwin and Goose Green airstrip, they claim the British forces have been driven back. An official communique issued here within the last hour acknowledges the heavy fighting that has been in the area today. Both the military sources and the official communique claim that the British troops have been forced to retreat and that Argentine forces have retaken all the territory they had at first lost to the British. However, the communique does not say at what time this so-called latest information was first known. And the final line of the communique says fighting in the area is still going on.
The View from Argentina. Newsnight will be giving more details of the British recapture of Goose Green and Darwin on BBC Two at 10 to 11, and we'll be back with the headlines in half an hour on BBC One.
Before the Valdunican Music Show, we're going over to the newsroom for a report from Michael Burke.
In the last 5 minutes, we've had a statement from the Ministry of Defence about prisoners and casualties during the capture of Goose Green in the Falklands.
I have a short statement. The Ministry of Defence has now received more details about the capture of Goose Green by the 2nd Battalion, the Parachute Regiment. We understand that when the Argentines surrendered, about 900 prisoners were taken by the battalion. We do not have information yet about the extent of British or Argentine casualties. A detailed statement will be made about our own casualties when next of kin have been informed. We very much regret to announce that the commanding officer of the 2nd Battalion, the Parachute Regiment, Lieutenant Colonel H. Jones, was killed in the action to take Goose Green. Brigadier Julian Thompson, commander of 3 Commando Brigade, paid tribute in a signal from the Falkland Islands to the magnificent fighting spirit shown by the 2nd Battalion, the Parachute Regiment, under the leadership of Lieutenant Colonel H. Jones. Thank you.
That's all from the newsroom for the moment. There'll be more details in the main news on BBC One at around 9:20.